My parents used my grandmother's $180,000 inheritance to buy a house, told me it was mine too, then sold it 8 months ago and handed every single dollar to my brother. And when I asked why, my mother looked me in the eye and said, he needed it more. I was 31 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen in the same house I'd helped buy, and I didn't say a word. I just nodded. And my mother took that nod as agreement, which was the first mistake she made that day. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the before. My grandmother, her name was Harriet, everyone called her Gran, passed away 4 years ago after a short illness. She was sharp until the very end, the kind of woman who kept her important documents in a fireproof lockbox with color-coded folders inside. She was organized the way people are when they've lived through hard times and learned that paperwork matters. She left me $180,000. Not my parents. Not my brother Derek. Me. She told me the year before she died, sitting on her back porch with sweet tea sweating rings onto the armrest. That money is for you to build something, Laurel. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. I should have written that down. I was 27 when she passed, working as a physical therapist at a clinic outside of Columbus. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I had a small apartment, a used car that ran fine, and a plan to eventually buy my own place. The inheritance felt like rocket fuel for that plan. I opened a separate savings account the week the funds cleared, and I didn't touch it. Then my parents sat me down 6 months later. My father did most of the talking, which was typical. My mother sat beside him looking soft and reasonable, the way she always does when she wants something. They explained that the housing market in their area was doing something interesting. Prices were climbing, their neighborhood was changing, and there was a house 3 streets over that they wanted. Not to live in. To buy together as a family investment. The plan was that they would add my name to the deed, we'd split any profit from a future sale, and in the meantime, it would build equity for everyone. It's smarter than a savings account, my father said. Real estate always goes up. I asked how much they needed from me. Just your inheritance, my mother said. And she said, just, the way people say it when they want something to sound smaller than it is. We'll cover the rest between us and the mortgage. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about Gran's voice on that back porch. Then I thought about my parents, who had always been mostly good to me, who had never asked for anything like this before, and I told myself this was family. This is what family does. I said yes. I did not say yes the way you say yes to a pizza topping. I said yes with lawyers and paperwork, because something in me, maybe the part of me that remembered Gran's color-coded folders, insisted on doing it right. We drew up a written agreement. It specified my $180,000 contribution, listed me as a co-investor with a 40% share of any net proceeds from a future sale, and was signed by both of my parents and notarized. My mother made a face when I brought it up. This small, pinched expression, like I'd accused her of something. But she signed it. They both did. I filed that document in a folder in my own home. I did not lose it. I did not forget about it. For 2 years, nothing much happened with the house. They rented it out for a while. A young couple, quiet, paid on time. I didn't see any rental income. My parents said it was going toward the mortgage and upkeep, which I accepted. Then the tenants moved out and the house sat empty for almost a year while my parents figured out next steps. I checked in occasionally. They always had a reason why now wasn't the right time to sell. Meanwhile, my brother Derek was having what could generously be called a difficult decade. Derek is 4 years older than me. He's not a bad person, but he has never met a consequence he couldn't outrun with a phone call to our parents. He married a woman named Bethany when he was 30, had 2 kids fast, and then spent the next several years making financial decisions that I can only describe as creative. He started 3 businesses, none of them made it to year 2. He borrowed money from my parents regularly. Amounts I only learned about later. When the marriage fell apart, Bethany got the house in the divorce, and Derek moved into a rental that he complained about constantly at every family dinner. My parents worried about Derek, the way people worry about a leak in the roof. Always present, always mentioned, always somehow more urgent than anything else going on. I noticed, but I told myself it wasn't my business. I had my own life. I had my clinic work, a relationship that was going well, a gym membership I actually used. I had, in the back of a filing cabinet, a notarized document that said I owned 40% of a house worth, by recent estimates, somewhere between $1.5 and $1.7 million. I was not worried. I should have been paying closer attention. The first sign I missed, my mother called me in February of last year, casual, asking whether I'd thought about what I wanted to do with my share of the house eventually. I said I'd like to sell and use my portion as a down payment on my own place. She said, of course. I didn't think about that call again for months. The second sign my father mentioned at Easter dinner that Derek was really struggling to get back on his feet, and that they wished they could do more. My aunt, who was visiting from out of town, made a sympathetic noise. I ate my ham and did not connect the dots. The third sign, and this one I cannot explain away, was that my cousin mentioned in passing that she'd heard the family house was going on the market soon. She assumed I knew. I didn't. I called my mother that same evening. She was breezy. She said yes, they've been talking to a realtor, just initial conversations, nothing decided yet, and she would have told me soon. I said I'd like to be included in those conversations, since I had a 40% stake. She said of course, absolutely. She'd keep me in the loop. She did not keep me in the loop. 8 weeks later, I got a text from my father, the house sold. Closing is in 3 weeks. We need to talk. I drove to their house that Saturday. Both of them were there, sitting at the kitchen table with mugs of coffee, and they had the specific energy of people who have rehearsed a difficult conversation. My mother had clearly been crying recently, or was prepared to. My father had his hands folded on the table like he was about to deliver a eulogy. They told me the house sold for $1.72 million. I did the math in my head instantly. 40% of $1.72 million, minus the original $180,000 I'd put in, which I'd think of as already mine, was somewhere around $508,000 net profit to me, plus the return of my original investment. Call it roughly $688,000, all in, depending on fees. Then my father said, "We've decided to give the proceeds to Derek." Not some of the proceeds, not a portion. The proceeds. I looked at my mother. She looked at her coffee mug. "All of it," I said. "He's rebuilding," my father said. "He needs a fresh start. We want to help him get stable." "I have a signed agreement," I said. My voice was very level. I was aware of how level it was because I was working very hard to keep it that way. "We notarized it. It says I get 40%. My mother looked up then, and she said the thing she probably thought would end the conversation. "We're your parents, Laurel. We're asking you to be generous. Derek is family." As if I wasn't family. As if I had contributed $180,000 of money a dead woman left specifically to me and family was a reason to hand it back over without a word. I looked at both of them for a long moment. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother had the expression of someone who fully expected me to fold. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "I hear you." My mother's shoulders relaxed. She reached across the table and patted my hand. I drove home. I went straight to my filing cabinet. I took out the folder with the notarized agreement inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and read through it 3 times even though I already knew what it said. Then I called a real estate attorney whose number I'd actually looked up the night before, after I'd gotten my father's text. Because I'd had a feeling, and Gran always said to do your homework before you walk into a room. The attorney's name was Mr. Okafor, and he was efficient and direct, which I appreciated. I emailed him a scan of the agreement and he called me back the next morning. He explained that the document was legally sound. My parents could not distribute the sale proceeds without my consent, without exposing themselves to a civil claim. If closing happened without addressing my share, I had grounds to pursue damages. He also explained something I hadn't fully understood before, because the agreement was tied to the property sale. I had standing to contact the title company handling the closing, which I did. I wrote a calm, factual email to the title company, CC in Mr. Okafor, explaining that I was a documented co-investor in the property, attaching the notarized agreement, and stating that any distribution of proceeds without satisfying my contractual share would be legally disputed. I used the word dispute rather than lawsuit because Mr. Spell, Okafor, suggested it sounded less inflammatory while meaning the same thing. I sent that email on a Tuesday morning and then I went to work, saw 6 patients, ate lunch at my desk, and drove home. My phone started ringing at 4:37 p.m. My mother 3 times, my father twice. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Derek, calling from a new phone. I let them all go to voicemail. My father's message said, "Laurel, we need to talk. The title company is saying there's some kind of issue. Please call me back." My mother's second message said, "I don't know what you're doing, but this is not how we handle things in this family." Derek's message said, "Hey, it's me. Look, I don't know what's going on, but Mom is really upset. Can we talk? I'm sure we can figure this out." I listened to all of them sitting in my car in my parking garage. Then I texted my father, "I'm available to talk tomorrow evening. I'll come by at 6. My mother called again immediately. I did not answer. I want to be honest about that night. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick, actually. The specific sick feeling of knowing that something in your family has cracked and no amount of fixing will make it exactly the same shape again. I ate cereal for dinner. I watched half of something on TV without retaining any of it. I thought about Gran, not in a sentimental way, but just, I wondered if she'd anticipated this. If that's why she left the money to me directly, and not to the family as a whole. If she'd known, the way old women sometimes know, that there were people in my life who would see whatever I had and call it a resource. I slept badly. I went to work. I came home. At 6 o'clock, I drove to my parents' house. Derek was there, which I'd half expected. He was sitting at the kitchen table looking uncomfortable, which was fair. My mother had been crying for real this time. Her eyes were swollen. My father looked like he hadn't slept. "The closing is being held," my father said before I even sat down. "I know," I said. "The title company won't release the funds until this is resolved." He said this like it was something I'd done to the family rather than something they'd done to me. "That's correct," I said. My mother said, "Laurel, we raised you. We gave you everything." I didn't argue with that. I said, "I want what the agreement says I'm owed, 40% of the net proceeds." Derek leaned forward. He actually looked more embarrassed than angry, which I respected slightly. "Look," he said, "I know this is a lot to ask. I know you had a deal. But I'm drowning here. I've got 2 kids. I've got nothing right now. I thought they told me." He stopped. He rubbed his face. "I didn't know you hadn't agreed." That landed somewhere in my chest in a way I hadn't expected, because I believed him. My parents had told him this was settled. They probably described my Tuesday nod as consent. "I believe you didn't know," I said. "But that's not between you and me. That's between me and them." The conversation that followed was long and circular, and my mother cried twice and my father made a speech about family loyalty that I let wash over me. At the end of it, I said the same thing I'd said at the beginning. 40% of net proceeds, as specified in the notarized agreement, or we would resolve it through other means. 3 days later, Mr. Okafor received a call from my parents' attorney. They wanted to negotiate. They proposed giving me 25% instead of 40%, with the remainder going to Derek. I said no. They proposed 30%. I said no. They went back and forth with Mr. Okafor for 11 days during which the closing was frozen. The buyers were getting impatient, and my parents were apparently miserable before they accepted 40%, which was all I'd ever asked for in the first place. Net of fees and the mortgage payoff, my share came to $641,000. I will tell you that I did not feel the way I expected to feel when the wire transfer hit my account. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt something quieter. Something closer to grief than celebration, and also something underneath the grief that was solid and sure. The feeling of having stood on ground that belonged to me and refused to move. I used $410,000 of it as a down payment on a house. Not a flashy house. A 1940s craftsman bungalow near a park, with good bones and a kitchen that needs updating and a backyard where I've already started a garden. My name is the only name on the deed. The rest I split 2 ways. Some of it went into an index fund, slowly and boringly, the way Gran would have approved of. And $30,000 I donated to a scholarship fund at the community college in the town where Gran grew up, a fund for first-generation students studying healthcare. I called it the Harriet Dunmore Access Award. The coster sent me a letter with her name printed on it, and I put that letter in the same filing cabinet where I keep my important documents, color-coded by year. My relationship with my parents is not the same. I won't pretend otherwise. My mother called me 2 weeks after the closing and wanted to have a conversation about healing, which I am not opposed to in theory. But I told her that healing would require some acknowledgement of what they'd tried to do, and that conversation has not happened yet. My father sends me texts occasionally, links to articles he thinks I'd find interesting, weather updates when there's a storm near me, the low-effort maintenance of a relationship he doesn't know how to repair but isn't ready to abandon. Derek and I actually talked. Really talked a few months after everything settled. He called me and he didn't make excuses. He said, "I didn't know the full picture and I'm sorry for my part in it." I told him I appreciated that. We're not close, but we're not strangers. His kids sent me a drawing for my birthday, crayon horses on a green hill, and I taped it to my refrigerator. Some people in my life have asked me whether I regret fighting for it. Whether the money was worth what it cost. I understand why they ask. I've thought about it myself, on the quiet evenings when I'm alone in the bungalow and the grief feeling surfaces. But here's what I keep coming back to. My grandmother sat on a back porch and told me that money was for me to build something. She didn't leave it to my parents to invest on my behalf. She didn't leave it to the family for Derek's fresh start. She looked at me and said you, and she meant it, and she put it in writing. And then she died, trusting that I would understand. I built something, Gran. I have the deed to prove it. I think about Gran a lot when I'm in the backyard of the bungalow, pulling weeds out of the garden bed I put in along the fence. Nothing dramatic about it. Just dirt under my fingernails, and the specific quiet of a Saturday morning that belongs entirely to me. And I think she knew, not in some mystical way. Just in the way that a woman who survived hard decades and kept color-coded folders learns to read people. She knew that money handed loosely into a family can disappear the way water disappears into dry ground. So she handed it to me directly, with my name on it, and she told me to build something. What I've come to understand is that what happened between me and my parents wasn't really about the money. The money was just where it showed up. It was about something older. A pattern where my presence in the family was assumed to be flexible, where my yes was treated as guaranteed, where what I had was quietly considered available to whoever needed it more. That pattern had been running for years before the house. I just hadn't named it. And I think that's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. If they're sitting somewhere right now recognizing a version of their own life in mine, you can be a good person, a genuinely good person. Someone who shows up and contributes and doesn't make trouble, and still be taken advantage of. Those two things are not contradictions. The people who took advantage of me weren't monsters. They were people who had learned that I would accommodate them, and they kept doing what had always worked until it didn't anymore. What changed wasn't my love for my family. What changed was that I finally understood the difference between being generous and being complicit in my own erasure. Gran didn't leave me that money so I could prove how easygoing I was. She left it to me because she wanted me to have something solid. Honoring that, actually honoring it instead of just feeling sentimental about it, required me to think clearly when everything in me wanted to keep the peace. It also required me to have done my homework. I had that notarized agreement because something in me, years earlier, had insisted on it even when my mother made that face. I'd contacted Mr. Brehunt. Okafor the night before that Saturday conversation because I'd learned quietly that hoping for the best while preparing for nothing is not the same as trust. It's just wishful thinking with a nicer name. When the moment came, I didn't have to scramble. I had what I needed already in hand. I'm not going to tell you it was easy or that I came out of it undamaged. I didn't. There are still dinners that are awkward and phone calls that feel like negotiations and a relationship with my parents that will probably never be exactly what I wanted it to be. That's a real loss, and I'm not going to dress it up. But I have a deed with my name on it. I have a scholarship fund that carries Gran's name into the world in a way that means something. And I have the knowledge, settled and quiet, like the garden, that when it counted, I did not betray the trust of the woman who believed in me enough to leave me something real. That's what I built, Gran. I think you'd recognize it.